My name is Diane Call, and I have the pleasure of serving as interim president of this institution. And I want to welcome the faculty and the staff and the students and our community members for joining us. This presidential lecture series is 10 years along, and it's usually greeted with great enthusiasm, as I am sure it will be as well today. The fall presidential lecturer is selected by the Presidential Lecture Committee, and they tend to pick someone from the university, a distinguished scholar from the university. In the spring, it's our custom to choose one of our distinguished faculty members from Queensborough. And of course, this semester, it's Dr. Donald Tricarico. I'd like to thank the Presidential Lecture Committee. They're here today. Dr. Karen Steele, our Vice President for Academic Affairs. Dr. Sasan Karimi, Chair of the Chemistry Department and a 2006 Presidential Lecturer. Dr. Amy Traver from Department of Social Sciences, and Dr. Mark Van Els, who is from the History Department. There's Mark, yes. So I want to thank them all for their wisdom in selecting. We have so many from which to choose. For the last number of years, Don has been, as a scholar, investigating the notion of Guido's in Italian-American studies.
Did I hit that?
And it is today that he'll present to us some remarks, some of his thoughts and insights from an academic point of view. And obviously it's a very timely, even though he began this, can I say it, 30 years ago? Doesn't look that old, does he? Over 30 years ago he began this, and he's quite a noted scholar on this topic. And again, because of all the publicity that continues around this notion of Guido's as part of an ethnic studies concept, I think we'll look forward to listening to his remarks. I know I will, and your questions afterwards. So in the spirit of Nixon going to China, I'd like to introduce Dr. Donald Tricarico, our presidential lecturer for spring 2011.
Thank you, President Call. When I was invited to give a presidential lecture, I found myself reflecting on the first time I lectured here at Queensborough and auditioned for an instructor position beginning in the fall of 1977. I think we already gave that away. I spoke to a sociology class in the Humanities building for the benefit of the current chair, the Venerable Chung-Shik Hung. That was 34 years ago, almost to the day. The trajectory from that point to this moment has defined not only a professional career, but a personal life for which I am very grateful. A presidential lecture is a distinction that will be hard to top. I could retire tomorrow, but I won't. I would like to express my gratitude to the committee, the Presidential Lecture Committee that invited me, and especially my colleague Amy Traver. It's a special honor to lecture during the tenure of President Diane Call. And I thank everyone for attending, and I welcome your comments and questions after the talk. I have been researching Italian-American culture since I chose to write a dissertation on an Italian-American community in the South Village. My mother's family landed there in the 1880s. I was born there myself during the post-World War II baby boom, but was spirited away to a suburban subdivision to grow up American. However, because my maternal grandmother came along to live with us, I grew up with a strong sense of Italian ethnicity, reference to the old neighborhood, not the old country. When I moved back to attend graduate school, there was enough Italian neighborhood left to become the subject of a community study. I intended to fill a yawning gap in the literature which still pretends otherwise. Sociological classics like White's Street Corner Society and Gans's The Urban Villagers. My Guido research is an extension of this interest in the city's Italian-American neighborhoods. No, I was not a Guido. It was not an identity that was available to me as a teenager outside the ethnic neighborhood. My own youth culture experiences in the late 60s and 70s were difficult to reconcile with Italian ethnicity. I have always been intrigued by how Guido has negotiated this difference. This talk places Guido in a wider discussion of ethnic difference rooted in New York City's Italian-American neighborhood culture. MTV's Jersey Shore marks a moment, albeit a definitive one, in the trajectory of that difference. Jersey Shore has been a commercially successful reality show since its debut in December 2009. Even before the first episode, Italian-American anti-defamation organizations stridently complained that the prominent identification of an Italian-American youth scene as Guido was a slur against the ethnic group. However, the gathering media spectacle let the cat out of the bag that there was an Italian-American youth culture that not only calls itself Guido, but privileges Italian ancestry. While Guido has become an ethnic insult that has entered American popular culture, I maintain that this is a facet of a complex identity transaction that's centered on a local youth subculture. Moreover, this involves the emergence of a collective subject that mobilizes ethnicity to realize its own social agenda. Reducing Guido to an ethnic slur overlooks this active role or agency, a concept that is the central feature of a constructionist or transactional model of ethnicity, emphasizing strategic choices made by groups and individuals within larger structures of opportunities and constraints. Agency also highlights a cultural studies perspective on contemporary youth formations that manipulate symbolic resources and raw materials to produce meaning in response to the transitional and marginal status of contemporary youth. As such, youth culture furnishes a sense of autonomy and status and self-esteem to balance against their time of insignificance. I argue that ethnic minority status has compounded the insignificance of youth in Italian-American neighborhoods. Further, ethnicity has been appropriated as an alternative economy of prestige, making Guido at once ethnic practice and youth culture practice. Although a neglected dimension in Italian-American studies, youth culture opens a window on an underlying ethnic culture that is alive and breathing, not frozen in repertoires inherited from the past. The emergence of a youth category called Guido suggests a hybrid form that is rooted in ethnic culture, but routed to American popular culture, in particular to consumption styles. It is currently at the center of a struggle for the representation of Italian-American ethnicity in the mainstream culture. My approach to Guido pivots on the concept of youth subculture, which can be defined as a group whose practices revolve around the symbolic meaning of stylized presentations of self, and around the symbolic meanings those performances have. Meaningful symbolism originates in the popular culture, especially in the mass media, but is adapted to a particular agenda sustaining the typical subcultural conceit, for example, that Guidos make their own style. According to one insider interviewed in 2001, Guidos can be easily recognized in a crowd. No matter what the occasion, a Guido is dressed like he is going to a club or on his way to work out at the gym. Tight muscle T-shirts are a wardrobe staple. These shirts can be worn with sweatpants and Nikes or with a sharkskin suit and dress loafers. An oversized gold chain and a diamond stud earring are accessories that complete the look. That was Michael, 2001. Another interview indicates that a shared style is fundamentally rooted in a peer group dynamic. This is Corinne, also 2001. My friends and I pretty much have the same hairstyle. All the girls wear it straight and shoulder length. All the guys wear it short and gel on top. If one were to wear it differently, we would have to make sure our friends would approve. We wear pretty much the same type of jewelry, things like gold crosses, pretty rings and bracelets our boyfriends gave to us. Before I started hanging out with this group, all I listened to was rap and reggae. Now all I listen to is freestyle and club music. As with all identity transactions, performances are coded for meaning by audiences as well as performers. When certain stylized presentations surface, Guido is at least implicitly possible. If youth subcultures originate in a historical moment, Guido coalesced in the nationwide pop culture fad sparked by the 1977 film Saturday Night Fever. The partly fictional essay by Rick Cohn in New York Magazine on which it was based suggests that a vernacular dance subculture was already in place. Still, the appearance of a film about young working-class Italian Americans in Brooklyn provided media culture validation of the city's Italian-American youth's special calling to disco. It became an origin myth for the Guido subculture, as suggested by the iconic images of Tony Manero dancing in a white suit on the webpage of local dance music impresario, DJ Brooklyn's own Joe Causey. Causey played a strategic role in the return of FM radio station WKTU to the air in the late 1990s on the strength of a revivified dance music scene with a promotion in Times Square that tapped into Saturday Night Fever imagery. A radio niche defined a second Guido moment that made it easier for Italian-American youth to imagine community beyond the neighborhood with Italian-American media celebrities and personae as style leaders. Winning space in the commercial entertainment and media culture provides unequivocal legitimacy in youth style markets. Recognition by dance music radio, which included acknowledging the role of local Italian-Americans as DJs and mixers, put them on a par with groups, blacks, Latinos, and gays that have formatively shaped the city's dance club culture. The microculture of dance radio mediated a connection to the consumption space of urban dance clubs with costly cover charges, drinks, and personal overhead, clothing, haircuts, jewelry, etc. Anointed as the Guido station and the official radio station for all Italians, WKTU created wants and shaped a hedonistic taste culture for Italian-American youth with commercial advertisements for products like tanning and a Caribbean resort aptly known as hedonism. It validated credentials for a world of fun and pleasure that is highly commodified. The commitment to dance club culture created more definitive separation from greaser as the dominant youth style in Italian-American neighborhoods. Greaser produced a pop culture moment in doo-wop which registers notable contributions from neighborhood Italian-Americans in New York City and Philadelphia. Greaser cultural expression was circumscribed by ethnic and lower class values that promoted an earlier transition to adult roles. It is otherwise a taste culture constrained by economic scarcity and infected by lower class status, including the dirty, i.e. greasy work of manual labor. The greaser label also appropriates racial stigma, which reinforces a dominated ethnic culture. In this scenario, invoking Italian ethnicity for a clubbing style was a refusal of racial as well as class stigmatization. Guido is predicated on rising class status and acculturation then. Contemporary youth styles coalesce when subjects are able to choose from a greater range of consumer goods and services and images. According to a self-identified Guido from Queens named Mike, to be a true Guido means that you are able to afford the Guido lifestyle, which includes expensive clothes, cars, and nights. It symbolizes the consumer desire or longing for consumption, if not its visible practice. One insider told me that if you don't have the money for the Guido lifestyle, you have to pretend that you do. Impressive financial expenditure has been built into dating relationships. Nightclubs have emerged as cathedrals in a landscape of consumption, a development that took an ironic twist when the infamous Manhattan Club Limelight opened in a renovated Episcopalian church. The new urban nightscapes provide abundant resources for experimentation and play. They sprouted ancillary consumption sites such as tanning salons, gyms, pool halls, and beauty parlors where the Guidettes and now the Guidos get manicures, pedicures, and have their eyebrows waxed. Urban dance clubs afforded Italian-American youth greater separation from ethnic neighborhood culture. There are places to indulge in adult activities of flirtation, sex, drink, and drugs, and explore cultural forms like music and clothes, as the basis for autonomous and distinct identities. More than any other places, dance clubs play out fictive scenarios of changed identities. According to a self-described club junkie named Maria, all the names are pseudonyms, by the way. Many young adults go to clubs to escape reality. It provides them with a fantasy land. The extra loud music puts people in a place they love, a place where they can get away from family members, schools, and the workplace. Clubs make you forget all your problems and dance the night away. Maria 19, 2004. The dance club offered a free space for the imagination, an area liberated from old restraints and repressions, a place where desire did not have to be justified and explained. Clubbing creates a consciousness and practice that is incompatible with the neighborhood bars and lounges, social clubs, Italian cafes, and other third places characterized by provincial forms of solidarity, and above all, adult surveillance. At the same time, clubbing and other new styles did not enter a cultural vacuum. It was absorbed with a local youth style tradition, within a local youth style tradition. Club styles initially blended with a street experience of leisure, combining male camaraderie and fighting. Like gangsta hip-hop, Guido has been marked by the aesthetic manipulation of streetwise masculinity, which is prominently symbolized by the wife-beater shirt, which is also known as the guinea tee. Further stylization is evident in the cultivation of a muscular physique, or looking ripped, as a bodily representation that sublimates fighting as subcultural performance. Italian-American street culture has heavily relied on pop culture images of mafia style. One insider maintained that young Italian-American males like himself are, quote, inspired by movies like The Godfather, Goodfellas, Scarface, Casino, and The Bronx Tale because they portray spending money, having nice cars, nice clothes, beautiful women, lots of power, and finally, the good life. Another reference to scene from a mafia movie to describe a scene from his personal life movie. We didn't have to wait in line, he said, as one of the guys had a connection that put him on the waiting list of the club. It was like we were Ray Liotta when he entered the Copacabana through the back door in Goodfellas. Like gangsters who strive to keep it real, however, Guido's claim a more authentic relationship to the mafia. Youth with family connections, this is Michael, 2001. The Italian-American youth does not only see these people in movies like Goodfellas and A Bronx Tale, but in front of their very eyes, living right in front of them. The average Italian-American youth lives in a predominantly Italian-American neighborhood where you are sure to see gangsters. Youth with mafia family connections have comprised the Guido elite based on powerful connections and financial power, allowing them to be style leaders who are tough guys. The closure of the Metropolis Dance Club in Queens in 2001, following a violent brawl between groups affiliated with youth whose fathers are mafia rivals, illustrates the contradictions of what Bill Ogersby calls ruthless consumption. It is not surprising that the grandsons of John Gotti himself, a dapper Dom, became the first Guido media celebrities. This new generation is notable for poaching gangsta styles that poach mafia imagery, including the pop culture narratives of their grandfather. Images of gangsters and gangstas provide ballast to a style pose that is increasingly compromised by a new masculine aesthetic of sculpted eyebrows and shaved torsos. Club culture was also appropriated within the framework of ethnicity. Youth-style performances do not require ethnicity. In fact, pop culture provides a script to transcend it, as it did for Italian-American youth who made notable contributions to the city's underground 1970s disco scene. However, it is not remarkable that when youth in the city's ethnic neighborhoods turn to popular culture, they simultaneously turn to ethnicity. Whereas doo-wop was more confined to local turf, the turn to disco brought Italian-American youth out of the neighborhood. Local peer groups or cliques were more easily incorporated into a youth category with a comprehensive style repertoire, a look, a sound, and scripted performances like dancing. The club scene made it possible to imagine a more inclusive ethnic solidarity among Italian-American youth, and an Italian-American youth category that spanned the 5 boroughs and extended into the suburban diaspora. Further, clubbing threw into relief differences with others. New York City's dance club culture has historically been stratified, containing a number of subscenes referenced to dance music subgenres like techno and house, which are coded for ethnicity, race, class, and sexual orientation. At the top of the club culture hierarchy has been a social elite based in Manhattan that includes media celebrities and other VIPs. Their patronage has conferred prestige on Manhattan clubs like Studio 54 that have rigorously separated out non-elites, which one club owner referred to as the chaff. Italian-American youth have actively used ethnicity to position themselves in the city's youth scene. Ethnicity filters new styles poached from other subcultures or appropriated from the broader symbol bank of mainstream popular culture. This is one insider named Jennifer, 2004. In recent years, body piercing has become a staple in an Italian teen style. These piercings include tongue rings, elbow rings, and belly rings. Guidos still wear gold crosses and Christ heads, but now tend to have earrings in both ears. Ethnicity gives coherence to a style which expresses a collective position in contemporary youth culture. Guido is an identity symbol that makes the relationship of Italian ethnicity and style precise for youth who subscribe to the codes, including significant youth others. Music and clothing styles coded for ethnicity establish a boundary intended to include some and exclude others. Style boundaries regulate competition for scarce youth culture rewards. Boundaries coded for ethnicity are important in the eroticized atmosphere of dance clubs where inhibitions are lowered by the consumption of alcohol and drugs. Ethnicity has been used in ways that are congruent with traditional practices. Deep commitment to traditional Italian family values. There is deep commitment to traditional Italian family values that is at the heart of a subcultural ideology. According to one young man, and this is a somewhat extended quote, "A Guido's family is very important to him, and the same goes for a Guidette. A Guido is always protective of his family members. They always respect and stick up for their mothers and grandmothers, who they call ma, nonna. They usually work for their father and plan to take over the family business if there is one. A Guido always watches over their sisters and never lets a guy go near them. Guidos usually live at home until they get married." That was Silvio, 2002. Idealized ethnic family values reach beyond youth scenes to establish subcultural difference. Italian family culture impacted on clubbing repertoires when siblings and cousins went clubbing together. Importing ethnic familism into the clubs was an especially important buffer for females. A sexual double standard could easily label the Guidette a donna puttana. The use of the Italian word for cousin, or cugine, suggests an attempt to create solidarity for a youth category that represents traditional ethnic morality in loco parentis. This moral community was marked by conspicuous style accessories like crosses and other religious medals made of Italian gold bestowed as gifts in ethnic family rituals. Ethnic signifiers marked a pool of youth compatible with parental preferences for ethnic endogamy. Ethnicity drew sharp boundaries for an internet chat scene that I studied from 1999 to 2001. Because the visual spectacle of style was restricted online, it was necessary to represent on screen using language. A discursive culture promoted an elaboration of ethnic meaning, which, in turn, occasioned the accumulation of valuable subcultural capital in the same sense that designer fashion is displayed. Self-presentations claim distinction for authentic Italian ethnicity. A verse that frequently surfaced in personal web pages conveyed a mystical purity and solidarity. And this is the verse: "Italian pride is in my mind, Italian blood is my kind," etc. Ethnic capital was manufactured in a familiar strategy that appropriates ethnic insults as symbolic reversals. Italchat youth played with these epithets in ways that mocked their very existence and the invidious status relations on which they were based. For example, Symbolic reversals that enhanced the construction of an essential ascriptive ethnicity allowed Italian youth to traffic in their own honor and corner the market in the process. It made Italians special apart from consumption style and youth culture, while others were lacking regardless of how stylish they were. With all this ethnic distinction, why not capitalize on ethnicity, especially in style markets that disparage them? Italian ethnicity is inferred in the youth style designated as Guido, although the relationship is not self-evident. In particular, why this symbol? And was it assigned or asserted? These are questions that impact on matters of agency and stereotyping. I argue that Guido has been negotiated in a give and take across overlapping ethnic and subcultural boundaries. This leaves room for the assertion of a youth culture identity that can talk back to assigned labels and ethnic stereotypes. Guido crystallized as an ethnic symbol in a vernacular setting. I first heard the name Guido circa 1987. It was used by local Italian-American youth to set their style apart. If we have time, I have a video that I can show you from a disco here in Bayside around this time. The social reality of this symbol was solidified in an underground tape produced by two young Italian-American men from the outer boroughs. The songs Guido Rap and Bensonhurst 86th Street were full of assertion for a distinctive style rising from the city's Italian neighborhood culture. While the lyrics of Guido Rap somewhat naively identified stylish youth with the historical slur guinea, Guido was not equivalent to historical ethnic insults at this point. The symbol may have originated in a specific local dynamic inside the ethnic boundary, especially in the status competition between recent immigrants who were just off the boat and more Americanized ethnics. Guido may have been the spin that more acculturated Italian Americans put on cugine, the name that immigrant Italian youth were using to refer to their scene. Cugine is the Italian word for cousin and reflects an attempt to create kinship solidarity based on ethnic ancestry. A 1986 article in a Queensborough Community College newspaper referred to a local Italian-American scene known as cugine, with the term Guido nowhere in sight. However, cugine and Guido were interchangeable by the late 1980s. Thus, the pose of the mean cugine was extolled on Guido Rap. The blurring of these terms and the gradual ascendance of the term Guido, not cugine rap, reflected the erasure of cohort differences inside the ethnic boundary, including prominent identification with Italian ethnicity by more Americanized youth. The choice of symbol may have mattered less than what it represented, a youth category presenting itself for the urban style spectacle. Guido was perhaps better at communicating the claim of a distinct Italian style. The playwright Mario Fratti suggests that the name Guido is a metaphor for the insouciant style represented in Italian post-war realist cinema, like La Dolce Vita, and especially 8½, whose main character Fellini names Guido, and was the inspiration for Fratti's lead in the play 9. It is possible that youth may have sought to cultivate the exotic aura of Italian stylishness, but not Italian styles. While the value of Italian ancestry was driven up, Guido has not demonstrated nostalgia for Italy and Italian culture, as with the Desi youth subculture and its penchant for Bhangra music. In New York City, an unequivocally Italian identity was unequivocally referenced to American popular culture: disco, big American cars, and leisure suits. Guido's style was more Bensonhurst than Milano, more 86th Street than Via Veneto. It was referenced to Saturday Night Fever, not 8½, or 9. While Italian-American youth culture in the city may have aspired to the sensibility of moda italiana, it has more immediately poached cool, fly, black, urban black styles. Guido is not an ethnic group stereotype at this point, but the name of a local youth subculture. The fundamental point is that there was a gathering performance of style that warranted a name on both sides of the boundary. The choice of an Italian identity symbol reflected their positioning in the city, and ethnic neighborhood culture in particular. While it may have engendered antagonism for a youth subculture, it was largely on the level of style. It did not pack enough vitriol to be an ethnic slur, which made Guinea and WAP fighting words for my father's generation growing up in Hell's Kitchen. The evolution of a subcultural symbol was quite possibly aided by a mass media stereotype, a caricature of the stylish but benign Italian priest Guido Sarducci, introduced on Saturday Night Live in the 1970s. It is plausible that the stylish image of Guido, referred to by Frati, arrived secondhand in this American stereotype. Guido evolved as a stigmatized youth identity in the late 1980s. This can be attributed to the crossing of a critical status boundary that reserved Manhattan venues for the jet set and glitterati. Manhattan discotheques routinely excluded the bridge and tunnel crowd, and the incursion of Italian-American youth singled out a category from the margins. The term Guido marked Italian-Americans as style outcasts marked by ethnicity. A 1998 thread on the Club New York City website reverberated with style panic. Quote, "The club scene in New York City has gone down so fast. Why? In one word, Guidos." The Village Voice columnist Trish Romano, assessing the 2003 closing of the Manhattan club's Exit and Sound Factory, worried about, quote, "perhaps the most serious consequence of the closures. Guidos will suddenly descend en masse, ruining the few remaining cool clubs." The nomenclature of Guido here is developed by assigning negative value. The symbol has been hijacked by arbiters of club culture taste to categorically disenfranchise a particular group. A similar identity politics is evident in the crystallization of a new name to devalue Italian-American youth reaching critical mass in the Hamptons club scene, which is patronized by Manhattan elites during the summertime. Reflecting a regional narrative, East End resort Guidos are now called Joeys, which extrapolate from the pop culture persona of one Joey Buttafuoco. The denigration of a local youth style known as Guido cannot easily be separated, however, from the denigration of Italian ethnicity. Consider this definition of Guido posted on a local club industry message board in 1998. I'll just put it up there. 100% Italian with heavy-duty ginzo attitude, black slick-backed hair, lots of muscles, starts fights. Have a Cadillac or some mafia-style Guinea car. The realm of youth culture competition has frequently been vacated altogether. A 1998 posting on the Club New York City website tapped into a theme of ambiguous whiteness to devalue Italian ethnic capital. All Italians from Sicily are part black. Since the island was invaded and their women were raped by Africans, that's why they are so dark. Get it? Subcultural identity has been hijacked for a discourse of ethnic prejudice embedded in American narratives about whiteness. A decisive symbolic development came with a racial killing in Bensonhurst in August 1989, when the establishment press identified the local teenagers and young men involved in the altercations as Guidos. Mainstream media portrayals did not reference the spectacle of youth style, but moral degeneracy embedded in ethnic Italian culture. These themes surfaced in the jockeying for power in local youth style markets. Symbolic annihilation impacted on the transaction of Guido identity. It strengthened the resolve of Italian-American youth in the city to not just win space, but achieve claims to distinction. When Guido was blamed on the Club New York City message board for the deterioration of Manhattan club culture, the response was quick and certain. "We need more Guidos in New York clubs. Guidos are back in style. Guidos rule." Defiance took the form of celebrating subcultural capital like music and clothes, reference to youth style markets. And far from internalizing pejorative meanings, Guido talks back to ethnic stigma. It claims distinction based on ethnicity, a claim that social power is derived from Italian ancestry, as well as youth popular styles. Self-naming is an oppositional stance that enhances subcultural solidarity. This features identification with a negatively privileged ethnicity and involves symbolic reversal, challenging ethnic epithets like Guinea. This is 19-year-old Frank, 2004. The word Guido is supposed to criticize Italians, but some Italians actually like the fact that they are called Guido. So really, this word has many levels of effect. It all depends on what generation and how strong the person's pride is. The word Guido applies to me and also to my friends, because we did take that offensively. We actually like it when we're considered Guidos. It gives us what you would say is a rep. Like Pachuco and gangsta or thug, Guido became the stylized performance of an ethnic attitude that claimed the right to a certain privileged cultural expression, like dressing up and dancing, in particular at elite clubs in Manhattan. Italian Americans with attitude presented a tough street pose, but the Guido label pivots on the claims made for a consumption style. A style pose activated embedded ethnic prejudice and marked a category of youth with meanings generalized to an ethnic category. Guido became a degraded youth style and a new ethnic epithet, a term that warrants a careful determination of insider status. Italian American studies is a field, in conclusion, that draws on the social sciences, the humanities, and history to further understand and experience identified with the Italian ancestry population in the United States. Scholarship is defined by the standards of research employed in those core disciplines. Perhaps the key difference is the interest and support provided by a community of scholars for a subject that is comparably discounted in the established disciplines. This sums up the work of the Calandra Institute at CUNY, which has become the center for Italian American studies. Guido reflects a fundamental Italian American experience. Italian ethnicity is invoked and meanings are produced. Perhaps more importantly, this is done in new ways. Young people and youth formations are new ethnic subjects, creating Italian American identities outside of traditional frameworks and producing new ethnic signifiers by engaging American popular culture. The identity symbol for this new collective subject is negotiated across significant boundaries. It has become the dominant stereotype of Italian ethnicity in the larger society. This is an anomalous ethnic development for establishment sociology, which has bought into the erasure of compelling Italian American difference. However, the metaphor of twilight, which has characterized Italian American ethnicity since the mid-1980s, has limited value in explaining developments in New York City, which still contained 600,000 persons of Italian ancestry in 1990, with impressive densities that supported neighborhood communities, most notably Bensonhurst, with a population of 100,000. These urban Italian communities organized a different cultural experience in the city. It was exaggerated in the press's response to the 1989 racial killing in Bensonhurst, which extended the moral panic surrounding Guido to a closed and insular Italian American community that did not subscribe to core values of a liberal society. Perhaps a hidden agenda regarded the defended Italian neighborhood as an obstacle to the market forces remaking a gentrifying global city. Guido represents an Italian American neighborhood culture that is representative of a wider Italian American experience and is not to be confused with the commodified Little Italy that is purged of Italian American neighborhood culture. New York City's neighborhoods in particular frame the experience of Italian American ethnicity in the mainstream mass media in films like Mean Streets and A Bronx Tale. These narratives stereotype a relationship between youth culture and Italian neighborhood culture that remains problematic in places like Bensonhurst and Howard Beach into the present. However, out-of-borough communities accommodated more assimilation and socioeconomic mobility in contrast to initial settlements in Manhattan tenement districts like the South Village. Italian Americans had the highest rates of home ownership in the city in the 1980s because families had relocated to the outer boroughs, including suburban Howard Beach and Staten Island, known as Staten Italy on WKTU. It is not a coincidence that these second-generation Italian neighborhoods supported a style-based youth culture predicated on personal consumption and sufficient leisure. Guido not only furnishes insights into ethnic roots, but maps where Italian Americans are going socially. Consumer desire maps a preferred route to the mainstream for ethnic minorities. Ethnic youth specialize in consumption, including cultivating new tastes and conspicuous display as evidence of the family's new status and Americanization. Consumption may be magnified with shortfalls of educational capital. To this extent, the young are experimenting with a style guide for a rising class of Americanized Italians as the feature component of a new ethnic script. While the older immigrant ethnicity was embedded in a scarcity economy and hard work, it is plausible that Italian immigrants in the second half of the 20th century brought a consumerist orientation with them. A consumption agenda explains the relevance of Guido in more affluent suburban settings. Italian Americans who have left the ethnic neighborhood have by no means consumed themselves into the woodwork. Guido can name Italian American difference in this diaspora. It even puts them on the map. The proliferation of Guido on Long Island is mapped at the website www.getofourisland.com. The site uses nativist imagery to document the plague of consumption spread by Guido's style. To document the plague of consumption style spread by Italian Americans arriving from the city. The coordinates that map the diffusion of Guido match the demography of Italian American settlement and confidently allow for the assignment of a label that confounds style and ethnicity. The symbol was explicitly invoked to create a privileged consumption style outside the ethnic neighborhood. The organization, New Jersey Guido, used the internet to galvanize a scene at the Jersey Shore in 2001 that muted ethnicity within a party ideology, reference to, quote, the crazy-ass New Jersey scene, an evolved and sophisticated Guido lifestyle defined by youth, beauty, and flash. The dialectic of Italian ethnicity consumption was perhaps taken to a climax when the Guido symbol was jettisoned altogether toward the end of the decade, leaving the door open for MTV to paint a big Italian flag on the door of a beach house. A consumerist orientation makes Guido vulnerable to a takeover for commercial purposes. Jersey Shore situates a hedonistic style not in inner-city Italian neighborhoods like Bensonhurst, but in trendy consumer markets like nightclubs, resorts, and tanning salons. However, it is hardly without precedent as a representation of Italian-American consumption. The MTV brand adds formidable weight to a mounting media narrative of Italian-Americans as flashy and shallow, an arriviste ethnic class culture marked by their vulgar consumption of trendy goods and services. This narrative imagery is showcased in the Hollywood films Goodfellas and Casino, the HBO production The Sopranos, and as caricature in Married to the Mob. Nouvelle Italian-American style is portrayed in the reality cable TV show The Real Housewives of New Jersey. Jersey Shore now anchors a Guido subgenre that includes the reality show Growing Up Gotti and a low-budget late 1980s film Spike of Bensonhurst. These are not the usual ethnic subjects. They are transacting ethnic identities in a liminal space that marks the transition from ethnic neighborhood culture to more mainstream consumer markets. Symbolic work is largely referenced to popular culture, and the media culture has become the main arena in a struggle for representation. Jersey Shore became a referendum that contested subjectively constructed ethnic meanings. Italian-American anti-defamation organizations denied ethnic agency to a youth culture subject that defiantly asserted an ethnicity that works for them. Framed as an epithet, Guido can be externalized and therefore disowned. REV's consumption may be what Italian-American elites find most insulting about Jersey Shore. It is ironic that at the very moment that Guido gained mainstream recognition for consumption, it has to struggle for ethnicity. The culture skirmish, it was hardly a war, inside the ethnic boundary was incorporated by the media spectacle that spawned it. While youth agency was served, absorption by the media and entertainment culture promotes the erasure of ethnic as well as youth culture subjects with stereotypes that reflect brand formulas. Italian-American studies should investigate contemporary forms of ethnic agency that express difference with further movement toward the mainstream. The example of Guido suggests the presence of lived ethnic cultures in unexpected places. Ethnic agency is possible because these are not the usual ethnic times. In fact, it is enhanced because without the certainty of traditional moorings, ethnicity is up for grabs and under construction. Thank you.
I remember there was a movie with Cher and Nicolas Cage, and to my recollection, that was the first time I ever began seeing the so-called Guido image. I forgot what it was called. Moonstruck, right? My wife knows. Wasn't that one of the most originating Guido styles when it really first started with Moonstruck, or even before that?
Yeah, I always saw that as a film about Italian-American neighborhood culture. It was really about family. But it's a youth culture style that comes out of that neighborhood culture. That film, I think, was set in Brooklyn, in South Brooklyn, perhaps. Although there was in Brooklyn Heights. Although actually my godmother's funeral parlor was featured in that film, and that was on Sullivan Street in the Village. Nucciaroni's funeral parlor, but anyway. But again, I think Guido is like what you want to make it. To a large extent, it's in the mind. It has roots in that neighborhood culture.
You suggested that the Guido is losing its ethnicity, and I heard from one of my own kids that Guido is now going across the board, and it's just a style of its own. Is that what you were suggesting?
Well, that's what happens to youth styles in a commercial culture. It's marketed to everybody, and the same thing happened to hip hop. Everybody my students who are 18 and 19 and 20 already forget that hip hop has roots in the South Bronx. Has roots in the black inner city. They've already forgotten that.
Oh, so you're suggesting then that this consumerism is what's driven it outside the community and the ethnicity?
Well, yeah. I mean,
okay.
Little Italy markets Italian culture as a restaurant economy. But there's a big youth market. There's a huge youth culture market, and that's what MTV does. I mean, it's no coincidence that this is MTV doing this. MTV's been merchandising youth styles since 1982, and it gets better and better at it. So it just becomes like a pose that's hanging in your closet, and that has nothing to do with ethnicity. No hard questions.
Thank you. No. I like your focus on the fact that Guido's this liminal identity between the consumer market and the neighborhood, right? Is it a liminal identity also in terms of childhood and adulthood? I mean, Do we not see Guido in adults?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of crossings. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, but identities become more. The idea that identities become more salient when you leave, and you have to negotiate something different, and you have to introduce yourself again. And plus, there's this openness to change.
Do we see people outgrowing Guido?
Aging out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Although I think that it is a style that you can take with you, because it is about consumption. I mean, there are also generational differences. I mean, it's interesting to go on websites where older generations of Guidos are taking the younger generations to task, for playing around with their eyebrows and bringing in too much hip hop, too much rap music. Their fathers are taking them to task.
Hi, Don. I'm going to
Another
date
hard question.
myself with this question, but I liked your idea of the subculture being transactional, emerging out of negotiation, and you talked about Guido being stigmatized in, late 80s, did you say? Later than that? Well, my question is, my memory of the youth subculture of the late 70s was that there was hostility and stigma toward disco, as in the disco sucks. Movement, and that it wasn't just a reaction to the music or the style, that it was an expression of ethnic hostility. So did the culture as it emerged also reflect that conflict within the youth culture?
Yeah, without a doubt. It was also anti-gay. I mean, it picked up anti-gay sentiment also. But I think it depended on what vernacular setting you were part of. I think that what the Italian kids were doing, what kids in Italian neighborhoods were doing, was finding a way to participate in a youth culture that didn't require them to grow their hair long. And I think they always watched the black youth styles that were around them. My father, growing up in the late 30s. On 9th Avenue in Hell's Kitchen, he and my uncles, they had zoot suits. And they went up to jazz clubs in Harlem. And my father had a tremendous jazz record collection. The counterculture was, and rock music was not, they weren't American enough to be counterculture. And I think that narrowed their choices. Also, I think that they have this insularity about them, and I think it comes from living in an ethnic neighborhood. They didn't get out much. And even the Italians even the Italians in the village. I mean, they didn't go to the village. That was Houston Street was a border that. They really didn't cross that much. They didn't identify with it. I don't know that they knew that the rest of America thought that disco sucked. And you know what? I don't think they cared. And they held on, and they just kept going to discos. And WKTU went off the air in the 80s. I wasn't into disco either. I mean, that's what I was told. And then it came back, and the Italians are waiting for them. Like it never left, or it shouldn't have ever left. And when it came back, it was the Italian station. Now they shared it with Latinos, and that worked out. Mambo Italiano. Karen?
Who's supporting the consumers?
Who?
I mean, how are they paying for all the free time?
They work construction, and they work in family businesses. It's a small business. Italians have small businesses, and they could even drop out of high school. I think that a lot of the concern, which actually gave rise to the Calandria Institute at City University, was this concern about Italian American kids dropping out of high school, the highest dropout rate in the city. one of the highest dropout rates in the city, a very high rate, almost like 30%, I think, at one point, maybe. But I always argue that they dropped out of high school to work in their families' pizzerias and body shops and to do contracting. These are the structural changes that had to take place to allow them to and obviously there was an economy of means, and they weren't. They couldn't afford Manhattan, at least not on a regular basis. And they drove their father's cars. They drove their father's Cadillacs, which they used to, in the 80s, they referred to as Dadalacs.
Could you comment on the Catholic Church and the Guido culture?
No, I can't. Is there? Can you? I'd love to hear it. You mean like Father Guido Sarducci? Was he the first Guido? I think it was Tony Manero. On the Catholic Church? No, but the Feast of Santa Rosalia was, they played a lot of disco there. I'm just reaching now, but actually, the Feast of Santa Rosalia was probably sponsored by a society and not by any of the churches. Anyway, Dr. Riddell.
I was just wondering, since you mentioned the Catholic Church and that, to what extent does the Guido identity provide kind of like simultaneously allows especially second, third generation Italian Americans an ethnic identity, and yet at the same time separating them from traditional ethnic restraints such as...
Yeah, because there is that tension, and I definitely, and in fact I kind of alluded to it, kind of went by pretty quickly, but I think it did allow kids who were more Americanized, Italian American kids. I actually knew a kid who, one of my students' brothers, this is it was over 20 years ago, who actually she had an Irish surname, in fact, and her brother had an Irish first name, Sean, I think. But his parents divorced, and that might have made this a little easier to do. But he was growing up in Ozone Park, and there were a lot of Italians in Ozone Park in the mid-80s, mid-late 1980s, and he drove a used Fleetwood. Now, his father wasn't living with them, so he couldn't drive his father's. His father was an Italian guy anyway. So he bought a used Fleetwood from money that he made working in a restaurant on Woodhaven Boulevard that was owned by, I won't name any names, but a famous name in those days. And with the money that he made, he bought his own Fleetwood, and he changed his name from Sean to Sal. And he couldn't get Italian enough. But a lot of that, but again, he didn't learn Italian. He learned Guido. It was just about a youth style, a youth identity. I really do think that it does represent an attempt. Second generation youth, immigrant youth, struggle to reconcile being American with being ethnic. They don't just cave in. They just don't. I did. I struggled with it too. I had a hard time, going to Woodstock because, my cousins were coming over that weekend.
I'm just curious. It's pretty loud. Were you once a Guido?
No, but I have plans to be when I retire.
Sorry.
In fact, I was going to talk to Paul about that. Something to do in our retirement. No, but you know what they say? I've known a lot of Guidos, so I have a lot of Guidos in my family. You know how that is.
I thank you for being with us today. We have, as our tradition, a reception right outside with some light refreshments, and I appreciate your joining us today. Stay tuned for our date in the fall.